I came out here and they kept calling it the beautiful Duncan Park, and it was a beautiful Duncan Park Stadium. It was just gorgeous out here. Everything was not new, but everything was really up to date, and it just looked great.
There's so much history in this ballpark, and most of you people that grew up in Spartanburg are aware of that history, and everybody's willing to do it. It's almost like you're playing in a museum.
To me, it's the architecture of Duncan Park. You know, it is the old school, the wooden seats, the roof over your head, the block sight lines by the beams that hold up the roof, and it's the people. That's, to me, what makes the place so special. That's what makes it speak when you walk in there.
Duncan Park Stadium, located in Spartanburg, South Carolina, is the oldest baseball stadium in the state and also one of the oldest in America. It opened in the summer of 1926, and throughout its long history, it has been where ball players have developed their skills with hopes of playing in the big leagues. It has been where championships have been won and famous sports stars and entertainers have visited. Over the years, with the games, entertainment, and excitement that this ballpark created were lasting memories. Memories that hold a special place in the hearts and minds of the many thousands that can say they were part of Duncan Park Stadium.
The greatest memory, I would have to say, was just being at that ballpark. It was such, again, it was the size where there was no bad seat in the house. You know, you were sitting there with people you didn't know, yet you felt like you had a connection with them. You were pulling for the Phillies. It was a small park. It was really a great family place to be.
I was 5 years old. I was the youngest boy at the game, and as a result, I won a Lone Ranger wristwatch, which I still have. There was a little girl there who was 10 years old. She won a baby doll because she was the youngest girl there.
The 1926 Spartanburg Spartans were the first team to play a full season at Duncan Park Stadium. However, baseball was popular in the Carolinas long before the Spartans first took the field. What the then new ballpark offered the area was a bigger and better place for teams to play and fans to watch games.
This area, when I say this area, I'm not talking about just Spartanburg County. Cherokee County, Union County, Greenville County has been a hotbed of baseball from back in the textile baseball days, and I have a lot of information on textile baseball, especially from my hometown, Packlet Mills. Every mill had a baseball team then, and quite often they played like a championship or something in Duncan Park. They also played the Spartanburg Peaches. Whenever they came in from spring training, they would probably play one or two of the teams in the area would play Spartanburg Peaches in a game.
Baseball was big in Spartanburg, probably because of the mill teams. There were so many, and it provided entertainment and then just some respite from the depression and bad times, and no TV, of course, at that time, just radio, and it was just a very well attended big community event, and very important to the area.
Spartanburg being a textile town, textile leagues were the thing back in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, and almost every child that has family in Spartanburg has some connection back to the textile industry or has a parent that was involved with Textile League baseball.
Since 1933, Duncan Park Stadium has been the home for the American Legion baseball team. In 1936, the ballpark drew national attention when it hosted the American Legion World Series. Susan Pope's father, Ty Wood, was a bat boy for the winning Spartanburg team.
That particular game was the first national championship for South Carolina in any sport, and the most attended game at that point. From the stories he's told me, he said there was nothing like the excitement of the day that they won.
In '36, I was only 3 years old. But I remember people talking about this. This thing was blowed up all over the state. That a team from South Carolina had actually won the national championship the many people that were at Duncan Park to see that last game. 25,000 people in that ballpark. You couldn't stir them with a stick.
This was the championship jacket that was given to each of the players for the 1936 American Legion team. They received this jacket, a suit from Belk's, and a trip to the World Series, which was in New York that year.
In the spring of 1937, the world champion New York Yankees reportedly played an exhibition game at Duncan Park Stadium. That team featured baseball legends Lou Gehrig and Joe DiMaggio. The Yankees would repeat as world champions in the fall of that year.
This is a photograph of the 1949 Peaches, and they were the Cleveland Indians affiliate. Kirby Farrell here is the manager, and he was the manager here several years with the Peaches, and then later went on up to Indianapolis. AAA ball is the manager, and then later went on up to Cleveland as a coach, and then for 1 year was the manager of the Cleveland Indians in the 50s.
In the early 1940s, minor league baseball was not played at Duncan Park Stadium. It would return in 1946 with the St. Louis Browns. They were replaced a year later by the Spartanburg Peaches, a minor league team affiliated with the Cleveland Indians. The 1952 team featured Rocky Colavito, who would go on to star in the American League. The Peaches would remain in Spartanburg until 1955.
The earliest memories I have of Duncan Park was actually getting to play there. I was picked on an all-star team 1 year, and I was playing with a team down here at a little town called Packlet Mills. And we went there to play the City League, which had picked all-stars. And the county won the all-star game, and I actually drove in the winning run. I hit it on top of the fence, and the boy scored from second base.
In the early 1960s, local businessmen Leo Hughes and R.J. Littlejohn struck a deal with the Philadelphia Phillies to bring minor league baseball back to Spartanburg. The Spartanburg Phillies would call Duncan Park Stadium home for the next 32 years, one of the longest affiliations in minor league history.
I know Mr. Littlejohn played baseball in college, and he loved the game. And they brought it in, they had the Spartanburg Peaches from 46 to 55, I believe it was, and then he wanted to bring it back, and it was kind of surprising because he called us all at a Sunday lunch one time and said, I haven't lost my mind, but I'm going to bring baseball back to Spartanburg. And he liked to go down to Clearwater where the Phillies train, and he had an interest in that, and I think he started communicating with them down there before he brought them back.
In 1965, the fortunes of the Spartanburg Phillies would change dramatically when Pat Williams was hired as the team's general manager. He tells what his years at Duncan Park Stadium meant to his long career.
I think it meant everything, very frankly. I arrived there at age 24 in February of 1965. I had played a couple of years of pro ball. I'd gotten my master's degree. I had done my military basic training, and there I was, a freshly scrubbed young baseball executive with all sorts of dreams and goals and ambitions.
It was neat to come out here on the weekends and during the week in summertime when you were out of school and watch the Phillies play. And it was your typical minor league park, all the signage on the wall out here with all the local vendors advertising. It was a really neat atmosphere.
Minor League Baseball voted the 1966 Spartanburg Phillies as the 78th best all-time minor league baseball team. Duncan Park Stadium had just turned 40 years old and was at the height of its popularity.
So it really was a remarkable team. We won both halves of the split season, drew 173,000 people in a town of, or a county of 50,000. The ballpark held about 5,000 people, and it was packed most nights. I still have wonderful memories of that season. It was truly a Cinderella season. All the promotions worked. The weather was good by and large, and it was just a very special season. And I think rightfully so, one of the most memorable minor league teams in the history of baseball.
One memory, I guess, that's very, very special to me personally is I attended a game in 1966, an exhibition game with the Philadelphia Phillies and the Pittsburgh Pirates. It was in, I believe, April of '66, and I went with Daddy and my grandfather. And I can still remember where we sat, and it was just, you know, a great time for our family.
It probably sounds silly. My greatest memory is that several of us that worked together used to go there after work. So we'd pile up and just sit around and chit-chat. So it was kind of like a happy hour.
I would say that the Spartanburg Phillies and Duncan Park, they pretty much started my love for baseball. They probably got me on the fan path for baseball, and especially for the being a Phillies fan. I'm now a diehard Phillies fan. It's the only team I really follow in the majors, and it's because of the Spartanburg Phillies, because of all the time I spent watching them, watching guys that played for them, that then went and played in Philadelphia. You just make that connection. And so I have to credit Duncan Park and the Phillies for getting me into baseball.
Although the 1966 season ended in great glory, it had a memorable start for one young Spartanburg Philly. Pat Williams tells the story.
So we came up from spring training in Clearwater and opened the season. Never will forget it. We were playing at Duncan Park, playing the Greenville Mets, and this hard-throwing right-hander was on the mound for the Mets. Larry Boa, in his first pro game, 19 years old, struck out 4 times that night and called his dad back in California that evening and said, "Dad, if every night is like this, I'm going to be home very quickly." Fortunately, Larry did not have to face Nolan Ryan every night as a minor league ball player.
In addition to Larry Boa and Nolan Ryan, many others played or coached at Duncan Park Stadium and went on to have great major league careers.
There really were. My first year, 1965, the Cardinals had a farm team in Rock Hill, and I became friendly with the little manager, former infielder. His name was Sparky Anderson. Ball players of note came through there. And for example, in 1965, the Giants had a club in Lexington, North Carolina, and a very, very gifted outfielder. I still remember seeing him. His name was Bobby Bonds. And he developed or gave birth to a young man who, set the baseball world in his ear for many years, his son Barry. Good players always in Gastonia. The Pirates had good players. Al Oliver came through there, among others. Bob Robertson, who had a long career with the Pirates in the big leagues. And the Braves ended up in Greenwood, South Carolina. And I can still remember a young 18-year-old outfielder by the name of Dusty Baker arriving from California to start his pro career in Greenwood. Wonderful memories of some of these athletes who at that time were 18, 19-year-old minor league ball players who went on and had outstanding playing careers in the big leagues.
Pat was such a wonderful promoter. People would come just to buy the programs because you were going to win something. They were giving away all kind of stuff during the game by buying the programs.
I did everything we could to bring people, attractions, famous people. Bob Feller would come in every year and pitch an exhibition for us. The great Hall of Famer Max Patkin, the Clown Prince of Baseball, was there. So I remember bringing in Bart Starr and Johnny Unitas, who at that point were at the absolute peak of their pro football careers. They came and made a ballpark appearance. Paul Hornung, the great Packer running back, even brought in Oscar Robertson, who was at the height of his career in the NBA. And so anything that we could do to draw people, create interest, get a buzz going at the ballpark, we would do it.
Well, there was one thing I learned from Pat Williams, that, the baseball game is the baseball game, but you had breaks in between the times of the innings and things like that, and he brought entertainment to Spartanburg. I mean, it was something different, it was exciting, there was always something new going on.
In 1967, Ed Dickerson, then a sophomore at Spartanburg Methodist College, was hired to be the public address announcer for the Spartanburg Phillies. He would remain until the team left in 1994. He tells what the position meant to him.
Well, it made me visible in the community. As a public address announcer has to, often heard but not seen, but people would see me preparing for the job. So being public address announcer for me meant that I was more visible in the community.
Through his nearly 3 decades associated with baseball at Duncan Park Stadium, Ed Dickerson worked alongside radio announcers John Gordon, who went on to the Minnesota Twins, and Warner Fussell, who would become the voice of This Week in Baseball. He also witnessed the progress of everyone else associated with the game.
Watching the players develop, watching the umpires develop, because the umpires moved up along with the players, watching the general managers move on to different careers. I found that very interesting, very exciting, because I could actually see them get better. I'd watch them from one part of the season to the other, improving their skills.
I can just remember that this was the center of entertainment and the center of fun. You came out, same folks, you saw the same folks, every night. Everybody knew everybody by name. It was just one great big family, and it was big.
A unique original feature that still exists at the ballpark are the wooden grandstands. It is from those bleachers that many thousands of baseball fans spend time with family and friends watching the hopefuls of tomorrow. They can say they saw Larry Boa, Denny Doyle, Juan Samuel, and Darren Dalton before they would go on and play for the Philadelphia Phillies. They can also say they witnessed Ryne Sandberg, Sammy Sosa, Ivan Rodriguez, Tom Glavine, and Chipper Jones before they were big-time Major League stars.
My parents ran a dry cleaners, and my mom was a seamstress and kept all the uniforms up for the Phillies. So a lot of times these guys, back then were just minor league players before they moved on to the majors, they would come down by the dry cleaners, because a lot of them have their regular clothes cleaned there, and they would come by and get a Coke and talk, and it was just, because these were all young kids, and a lot of them were away from home, and they were looking for somebody to talk to, and Mom was the one sometimes they would talk to.
The best memory, of course, was just watching baseball, just sitting there relaxing, watching baseball. Some of the seats in Duncan Park, the green seats as they were called, were actually from Connie Mack Stadium in Philadelphia. When it was torn down, they brought them down to Spartanburg. So it was a sense of history. When you were sitting in those seats, it was a sense that you were sitting in history, baseball history.
Through the 1980s and into the 1990s, fan interest and attendance of minor league baseball at Duncan Park Stadium continued to dwindle. Factors that contributed to the decline were the completion of I-85, which increased travel between cities, and being able to watch professional baseball and the Atlanta Braves on television.
I think that keeping the minor league baseball here, I think it had reached its time. Used to be when I was little, a trip to Greenville was something you did a couple of 3 times a year. Now you get in your car and you drive to Greenville for dinner. The world's gotten smaller, and I think that had a big part in the reason that minor league ball finally wore out here.
Interest in attendance also suffered because the ballpark was now outdated. It no longer met the standards required to run a profitable minor league baseball operation. The franchise was looking to move and found a new home in Kannapolis, North Carolina. When the Spartanburg Phillies played their final season in Duncan Park Stadium in 1994, it was the oldest ballpark in America hosting full-season minor league baseball. The curtain finally came down on September 1, 1994, when the Spartanburg Phillies played their final game at this historic ballpark.
I think the last game played in Duncan Park in '94 for me personally, because that represented a closure in one part of my life. I had spent, at that time, over half my life working at Duncan Park. And so it made me pause and reflect on the impact that this facility had on me personally, on the game of baseball, on the city of Spartanburg.
In the late spring of 2005, the Friends of Duncan Park formed in an effort to improve the deteriorating conditions at the ballpark.
And I sent an email to about 25 friends around town and just asking for whether they would have an interest in working on the preservation of this ballpark. And to make a very long story short, I ended up basically the de facto president of this grassroots group, and we created a public relations campaign basically to save the ballpark. Now, I don't know that the wrecking ball was ever coming, but Mother Nature's wrecking ball was. And if somebody didn't stand up and say, hey, what can we do here, then the oldest ballpark in this state wasn't going to be here in 10 years or 5 years or whatever.
The voice of the Friends of Duncan Park was heard. The city of Spartanburg and Spartanburg School District began efforts to save and restore the old ballpark.
One of the things that we did was we sort of painted the picture that this can happen other places. Durham Athletic Park in Durham, Rickwood Field in Birmingham are a couple of standing examples of how you can renovate an old ballpark and continue to use it. We don't want to have, this used to be the site where this stood. No, we want it to be, when you walk in, a better version, a cleaner, a newer version, but you still get the aura. Without that, you don't have Duncan Park.
Looking at the history that this park holds, it is a grand place to be able to say belongs to you, and you can be a part of it. So we want to develop that educational part and that history part of Spartanburg.
An important historical aspect of Duncan Park Stadium are the 500-plus green seats that have been blended in with the wooden grandstands. These seats were once part of the first concrete and steel stadium constructed in America, Connie Mack Stadium in Philadelphia.
Well, when the Phillies moved to a new stadium and the Connie Mack Stadium was torn down, those seats came here. They're in great shape. They're protected from the weather up underneath the canopy. People that know that those seats are here call, email, text, everything. What about the Connie Mack seats? What are y'all going to do with them? We want to incorporate those Connie Mack seats in the final design of Duncan Park. I do know they're a popular part of the ballpark.
The history here is long and rich and continues to grow. Those that have been a part of that history are hopeful that future generations someday will be able to share their warm memories of the time they spent at Duncan Park Stadium, South Carolina's oldest ballpark.
Almost every child that has family in Spartanburg has some connection back to the textile industry or has a parent that was involved with Textile League baseball, softball. And looking at the history that this park holds, it is a grand place to be able to say belongs to you, and you can be a part of it.
You know, part of my introduction in every game, welcome to beautiful Duncan Park. So when I see Duncan Park today, it's no longer beautiful. It's historic, but it's no longer beautiful. I also think of the potential in that facility, because if it can be restored to its former glory days, then it once again can be properly announced as beautiful Duncan Park.
So many people that want to see this program succeed in renovating this stadium instead of tearing it down. And we're just going to have to be patient and wait for the economy to rebound a little bit and work, get our plans laid out, which we're working on with our architects, so that when the time comes that we can move on with the project. I think it will be a glorious place.
My dream for the ballpark would be that it continues to be the home of amateur baseball. I think having Spartanburg High School play there and its various tournaments, and I think is a great thing because it adds that next generation of people that can say they've played there. Just want to see it get its due in its rightful place, and I really want to see it be something that Spartanburg can market to the state and to the region that, hey, you can come visit this any day. And it's always here for you, and it's as active as it was in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s.
I just think that Duncan Park could be a jewel if it's renovated and done right. It could be a jewel, and it could be something, a drawing card for the city of Spartanburg and the county.
And if it can be restored to its former glory, its former beautiful condition, then we'll have a whole new generation of Duncan Park fans here in Spartanburg.